You're listening to a Comics XF podcast.
X-Men. Get it!
Hey everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Battle of the Atom, your weekly X-Men podcast where we rank every story from A to Z.
I'm Austin.
And I'm Adam. Zach has the week off, and I am thrilled to be joined by my colleague and editor over at Comics XF, X-Men historian and real gentleman of leisure, and a generally cool and awesome guy, Austin Gorton. Austin, how are you tonight?
Hey, Adam. I am doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I don't know that I can fill Zach's shoes, but I'll put them on and take a little walk around the place for a bit.
His bad boy shoes.
Right, exactly.
I didn't pick you for your bad boy qualities, but I do know that you are a bit of an X-Men obsessive. So I think you're the perfect person to fill in for Zach this week. For listeners who don't know you and your blogging and your writing, can you just give us a quick intro into who you are and what you're all about and your connection to X-Men?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I've been reading the X-Men I was like 12 or 13 back in the early 90s. I am an old I have been blogging and writing about the X-Men since, I think, 2009 was when I started reviewing every issue of X-Men in publication order, which of course was a lot easier at the beginning when it was just the X-Men. And I was like, that's all I'm going to do. And then New Mutants came along and I was like, well, I can't not review New Mutants. So then it became 2. And then I was like, well, now I'm pot committed. And so then it quickly became everything. And so that's over on my my website, therealgentlemanofleisure.com, and joined the crew at Comics XF a few years ago and contribute stuff there. And otherwise, you can find me all over the internet writing about various pop culture things, as well as a lot of X-Men stuff.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned New Mutants because we are going to be talking about 2 characters that premiered their first appearances in New Mutants, the first of which is Lila Cheney. Thoughts on Lila, the intergalactic,
yes.
Teleporter / thief / rock star. What do you think about Miss Lila Cheney? Well, hold on. Before we get started, we got to establish, you said that you don't necessarily say Lila Cheney the way I'm saying Lila Cheney.
Yeah, so back in the old days, we'd read comics and you didn't necessarily know if how you were reading the names in your head was quote unquote right, because they didn't have like movies about this stuff or TV shows, and there weren't podcasts where creators or fans were talking about this stuff. And so you just kind of made it up what you thought was right. So for a very, very long time, possibly until I listened to an episode of this show and heard someone say the name, I always read it as Lila Cheney, like she's French in some fashion. I don't know why. And it's not one of those, like, I know there's some people out there who get they have real horses in the race as far as Submariner versus Submariner. I am happy to concede that it is almost certainly Cheney. That makes more sense. There are actual people in the world with that last name spelled that way, and that's how they say it. But yeah, anytime, there's always a little switch inside my head that's like Lila Cheney. No, it's Cheney.
I love that. It was a running bit on this show for many years, and it probably still is a bit that I was pronouncing the Brood incorrectly, probably for the same thing. So I do think it's Cheney, if only because, from what I understand, she's originally British.
Yeah.
Though I don't read her as having a British accent ever.
Nor do I.
Yeah. Sort of overlook that.
And I'm pretty sure I've probably heard Chris Claremont refer to her as Lila Cheney. And
Oh,
I
I'm
mean,
sure.
if he's not the expert on that particular name, at least, then I don't know who would be. But yeah. Otherwise,
Yeah,
other
go ahead.
general thoughts on Lila. She is, of course, very much a quintessential Claremont character in that she is a rock star and a mutant and a thief, but not just a thief, but an intergalactic thief who lives on a Dyson sphere.
Oh, I love that.
That is, yeah. And so that's great. And generally speaking, I feel like she is a little underutilized,
Mm-hmm.
particularly when, I mean, we'll get into this a little bit, she gets established as Sam's girlfriend in New
Mm-hmm.
Mutants, and just that kind of becomes one of the many plot threads that Claremont sets up and then doesn't really do a whole lot with, and then just quietly it goes
Just walks
away. And
away.
then yeah, and then she comes back under other writers and gets slotted into more of a just generic plot device kind of character, which is, I mean, that's kind of the arc that we're that we're looking at with the issues this week.
It's the lot of the teleporter, right? You start
Yeah,
as an interesting character and then you just used as a means of transportation.
right.
The
A
other
way to get
character,
aliens into the story.
yeah, the other character that we're talking about this week is the occasional bodyguard of both Lila Cheney and Dazzler, and that is Strong Guy himself, Guido. Guido fan? Strong Guy fan?
Yeah, for the most part. I'm not a huge Guido fan. Is that name offensive? is
I have wondered this as a native New Jerseyan who lives amongst a great number of Italian people. I've always wondered if the naming of Guido was potentially a little offensive, but I don't,
like I feel like
they,
back then it wasn't, but today maybe it is. And so should I be saying this? I don't know.
it's
Strong
such a,
guy.
yeah, Carosella. I mean, he's obviously got
Yeah.
this like very
Yeah.
Italian name and yet doesn't have a lot of stereotypical Italian qualities.
Not
Is not given
really.
an
No.
Italian accent, is not given any traditionally stereotypical Italian characteristics.
Yeah, he's
He's
not like constantly eating a meatball hoagie or something like that. It's like it
yeah,
just he just has this like deeply, deeply Italian name.
yeah, yeah. So we're going to get into these characters this week. This episode is not a Patreon request. This was one that we pulled off of our weird ideas sheet. And we do have some patron request episodes coming up soon. The line is still pretty short. So if you are interested in being a patron to Battle of the Atom, you're going to head over to patreon.com/Battle of the Atom. You're going to do what Zach says every week, reach deep down into your heart and your pocketbooks and throw a couple coffers our way. A measly $5 gets you your own pick. Like I said, the line is not long. So if you're already a patron who has not requested in a spell, just please hit us up. But we are going to start with our first story this week, which is New Mutants Volume 1, number 42. Beautiful Barry Windsor Smith cover. This is written by Chris Claremont, pencils by Jackson Geiss, inks by Kyle Baker, letters by Tommy Orrs, and edited by Ann Nesenti and Terry Cavanaugh. First impressions, Austin. This seems to be Sam's introduction of Lila to his mama.
Yeah, so this is maybe the only story that Claremont does where he kind of centers the Sam Lila relationship, outside of New Mutants Annual #1 that kind of
Mm-hmm.
introduces her and hooks them up, turns them into a thing. There's some other Sam Lila stuff later in New Mutants, but that's when Wheezy's taken over, and so this is kind of Claremont's opus to the Sam Lila relationship, and it comes at a really interesting time for the series where we're coming out of Secret Wars 2,
Mm-hmm.
which really wreaked havoc on the New Mutants in a
Oh,
way
big time.
in very, very few other series were affected. And Xavier is gone and Magneto is in charge. And the book is doing almost like a series of one shots focusing on different characters. Like the previous issue from this was a Danny centric tale.
Mm-hmm.
This is then obviously the Cannonball centric one, and it's that run of issues is quietly good. I think maybe a little underrated because they're not necessarily like big important narrative stories, and they're not like a couple of issues down the road from this we get the Larry Bodine suicide kitty
Oh, right.
speech
Yep.
issue that everyone that's everyone knows. These don't fit into those buckets, but they're pretty solid.
Yeah, and we're almost a year away, chronologically from Claremont stepping off of this book to
Right.
focus his efforts elsewhere. This is a real. I know we said this episode's about Lila and Guido, but this particular issue is almost primarily about Sam's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned before, Sam is going to bring Lila home to Mama Guthrie, and we get an opportunity to catch up with the Guthrie kids, especially Josh, who's not happy to see Sam. And Sam is so deeply insecure about his like hot rock star girlfriend.
Yeah, so he's very worried. It's basically like he's worried about bringing his girlfriend home to mom kind of
Yeah.
story.
Yep.
And it's kind of adorable. Uh in just because it's like it's aw shucks Sam Guthrie kind of characterization, and his mom is like the greatest person in the world, so I'm
Oh
not sure
yeah.
why you're so worried about it. I mean, she's almost a saint. She has a speech in here about prejudice and
Mm-hmm.
um how mutants are awesome, and people that are prejudiced against mutants are just like the people that look down on them for being hill folk, and look down on their black neighbors for being black and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, he's a teenage boy, like of course he's worried about what his mom's gonna think because he's that kind of teenage boy.
Yeah, and Sam is, he's not at his best. He's coming home and assuming that, well, because he left, somehow he abandoned his family, right? And he's decided in a split second that he's going to stay, right? And and he doesn't realize what is actually going on the farm, that
Right.
they've got it taken care of. And the other place where he is the absolute worst is to Lila, because Lila reveals that she has created, well, we don't realize in the moment that she has created this, but she has crafted this beautiful sculpture out of like alien singing glass
Hmm.
for Mama Guthrie. And Sam's immediate reaction is, where'd you steal that? And
Which
whew,
it's not
Sam,
great, Sam. Not
Sam,
great.
that's not what you say to your hot rock star girlfriend before you go introduce her to Mama. Um,
Right.
Lila,
So
not
many things
happy
wrong
about
with
this.
that
Yeah,
approach.
yeah, it's not great. Which sends Lila into a tizzy. I can't imagine why. She's not
Yeah.
happy.
And she it's she teleports off, and then we get a little bit of kind of the routine comic book action. Dazzler, this is during that period of time when anti-mutant sentiment is at an all-time high, so
Mm-hmm.
Dazzler is disguised and in Lila's band.
Yep.
So she pops up in this issue, and her and Lila go in a plane, and it crashes, and so then Sam and his brother have to help rescue them, and
We get that really great moment where Dazzler. So Lila's unconscious; she can't teleport them anywhere.
right,
But
right.
Dazzler says, "Hey, I could probably break us out of here, but I don't have any sound to use to get my powers going." And Josh has been revealed as this like beautiful singer. He
Hmm.
carts a
Hmm.
guitar around, and that's his beautiful talent. So he sings, and it gives him a chance to shine in the face of his jealousy of his brother, and it allows Dazzler to blast them out. It's a really great moment, for this little brother who just is not feeling connected to Sam the way he wants to be.
And then someday he'll star in a bad Romeo and Juliet
Oh
pastiche
my
written
God.
by Chuck Austin.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. Oh man, poor Josh. So we finally wrap up at the end of this story with Sam, about to meet Lila on the doorstep. Lila has forgiven him, has agreed to come meet Mama. And what's great about this scene is that Lila shows up in like the most, rock star getup. And to his credit, Sam says, "All right, let's head in." And Lila reveals that she was just kidding around. She's going to dress, a little more formally for Mama
Right.
Guthrie on this first visit, but that she had to make sure that Sam, could accept her for who she was before they walked through that door. And it's a really great character moment for both of them.
It is. It's so much fun. It's such a great beat of her just with him. Like,
Yeah, pretty
and
much.
but getting the the confirmation that she needs, and him, it's a neat little arc where he put his foot in his mouth and he learned his lesson, and then we get our
Mhm.
neat little moment that shows that he did in fact learn his lesson. And then she's like, yeah, of course, I'm just messing with you. I'm not gonna I would never embarrass you in front of your family. And they go inside and
Which
have a nice little moment.
I do think the irony of this is that, given what you described before, which was how accepting Mama Guthrie is of, the communities at large that she interacts with, I honestly don't know that Mama Guthrie would have a huge problem with
No,
the first
again,
look.
this is all in Sam's head. I don't
Yeah,
think she would care at all.
no, not at all. How are you feeling about Jackson Geiss's artwork here?
So this is I have a weird relationship with Jackson Geiss's artwork. When I read these stories as a weein, mostly as like back issues, I didn't love it because it, coming in the wake of Bill Sienkiewicz, it didn't seem as flashy, and you had
Mhm.
John Romita Jr. over on X-Men, and it just always it felt kind of middling. But when I went back and revisited these issues when I reviewed them on my site, I really connected to it, especially with Kyle Baker on inks, and it feels like he's got a pretty heavy hand. I think in this issue at least, it's even goes so far as to credit it with breakdowns to Geis, and then the finishes for Baker,
Mhm.
which seems to suggest that he was putting a really heavy hand on it. But I really like it. I think it fits these kind of quieter, more melodramatic, character focused stories that Claremont is telling in this era.
Yeah, it gives the story the naturalistic feel that it really seems to need, to keep
Right,
this grounded. Because
right,
this doesn't. While there are superpowers as part of this issue, it's a much more human story. And I don't mean that in terms of human versus mutant. It just is very very much a human experience of just,
yeah,
this is what it feels like to go home. This is what it feels like to introduce your girlfriend to your parents, that I think a lot of people reading these issues have to be able to identify with, these emotions and
right.
this stress. So I think it works
It's
really well.
very much a case of these are characters who just happen to also have superpowers versus characters with superpowers who just happen to have like relationship drama and stuff. They really are just kind of people first and foremost. And that was what Claremont was always really good at when he was at his best, was finding that humanity and centering that amidst all the Sturm und Drang of the powers and the fights and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So it sounds like we both like this issue, but
Yeah,
what we're going to do now is try and rank it on our big old list. Austin, you are witnessing the road to 900 stories. We now have
it's insane, you guys.
879 stories on our big old list.
Whew.
At number one, we have the House of X Powers of 10. At 200, we have Uncanny 122 Cry for the Children. At 400, we have X Factor Happenings in Vegas. At 600, we have X23 and Dakin Collision. At 800, What If? Astonishing X-Men. And down at 879, we have the worst X-Men story of all time, 2099, World of Tomorrow. So my advice to guests is always to use the hundreds as landmarks,
Right.
and kind of to figure out where we're going to wedge this story in. So where do you think we should start here with New Mutants number 42?
Well, you said 200 is Uncanny 122, and I feel like that's as far down as I want to go.
All right, so you're thinking this is a top 200 story?
I mean, yes, but that sounds, then when I'm like out of 879, maybe not.
All right, well let's do a little litmus test here. So down at 250 is Uncanny 230, 'Twas the Night Before. Is this as good as that?
Probably not.
Okay. All right, let's go down to 300 is the bar issue of Warren Ellis's Excalibur number 91. I would say this is better than that.
Yes, I would too.
All right, great. So we're in between 250 and 300. How do you think this fares against, let's say, Bendis and Immonen's The Trial of Jean Grey?
What number is that at?
That is at 286. I'm sorry.
I want to see what's around that, because I really like the art in The Trial of Jean Grey.
Oh, the art is fantastic.
Is really good.
Yeah, I mean, Immonen is always just out of this world, especially on that particular arc.
I mean, like, I like this. Just below that is Cyclops Volume 3 and Ultimate X-Men and Extraordinary. Like, I like this better than all three of those.
I do too, and I'm looking up the list now, a little bit higher. And where was that Colossus issue? Oh, here we go. This is probably a good one to compare this to. At 269, we have the issue of Uncanny X-Men 231, where Colossus pretends to be a ghost and reunites with Illyana. Do you think this is better or worse than that?
I think I like this a little bit more. I've never been a super huge fan of that one. I like it a little bit more than that, but not a ton. That's a good spot, I think. I definitely like this more than Kitty Pryde and Wolverine, which,
and that's right below that at
right below that one.
270. I do think that the ceiling is probably Madripoor Nights at 265.
Yes. Yep. I wouldn't go above that.
Okay. So right below that, we have two all ages Power Pack crossovers, which I think are good. But I think this particular issue of New Mutants is probably better than both of those. So what do you think about slotting this in at 266?
That feels good. That feels right. I like that.
All right, great. So I am going to plug this in, and New Mutants 42 is going to be our new 266. Not bad. We're going to stick with Lila Cheney, but we're also going to add Guido to the mix here, because we are going to, right as Legion Quest is taking place in the other books, except we're going to go to a story that is almost purposefully not involved with Legion Quest, which is X Factor Volume 1, 110 to 111. This is written by John Francis Moore and Todd DeZago, who I think Spider-Man readers might have a better relationship with in the 90s. Pencils by Jan Duursema and Al Milgrom on inks. What do you think? First impressions of this 2-issue arc of X Factor?
It's not great. It's not terrible. It's workman-like. Like, it's just a story that happens. Like,
so you're not really wrapped up in the saga of Jornik, the little blue Muppet in this story.
No, not at all. It's probably the quintessential, what we were talking about earlier in terms of the once Claremont leaves, no one quite knows what to do with Lila, so they just use her as an excuse to bring aliens into a story, which is fine, but
Yeah, it's fine, but let's provide some context for our listeners who might not remember this particular two issues. X Factor 110 and 111 are happening right before the Age of Apocalypse. So literally the end of the second issue here, 111, is going to end with that crystallization that leads to Age of Apocalypse in all of the books. But this book notably has nothing to do with Legion Quest like the other X books did.
Well, and what's super weird about it is that it kicked off Legion Quest a couple of issues before this, and then was like, okay, the cool kids can take it from here.
Right.
We'll do this weird Lila alien story while we kill time before the Age of Apocalypse.
Yeah, and that is kind of an understatement because literally Legion just takes X Factor and somehow teleports them to Madripoor, and the X Factor is sitting there going, wait, I didn't think Legion could do that. How did he do? And it's never explained. It's just
Nope, it
for
sure
story
isn't.
purposes, they were just like, get rid of X Factor, get him off screen.
Yep, get them off, get rid of X Factor into their own book.
So they arrive in Madripoor only to be attacked by first a spaceship and then an egg that hatches into a giant monster named Urg. Not a very particularly memorable monster, I would say.
Nope, pretty bland.
Urg has been hatched accidentally or perhaps on purpose to distract X Factor because there is a little, well, he starts as a sort of trenched coat man
Right.
off to the side, but we quickly learn that this is a shape-shifting alien by the name of Jornik. Austin, would you like the pleasure of describing Jornik's unique physiognomy, physical appearance?
I don't even know where to start. I think his brain is outside of his head, or he has a little tuft of like purple hair.
Yep, that sounds
And then he has like a walrus mustache, like a really long walrus mustache. Big googly eyes, and then like a dumpy frame. Like like he looks like a waddler. Like he'd waddle around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he kind of
he's
has
a
like
Muppet.
that. He's called a Muppet by Lila in this story, and that's not too far off. He kind of looks like if the Lorax was blue and like had a long neck, right?
Yes.
So, Austin, I have a question for you because this didn't make sense to me. Is that for most of 110, Jornik is looking for Lila Cheney.
Right.
But then it quickly turns as soon as Lila Cheney shows up that Lila Cheney is looking for Jornik. So who is looking for who? I am very unclear on the motivations of what is going on here because there's a mystical, magical music box that is going to somehow save Lila Cheney's life. But why is Jornik looking for Lila if he's also trying to get away from Lila?
I think John Francis Moore and Todd DeZago were confused as well.
Okay.
I guess no, I don't. I can't answer your question. It is very confusing. If we're being charitable, maybe the idea is supposed to be that there's the music box, and then there's what does she call them? Moogies. I think your Moogies are mine. So I think they each want something different at first, and so then that makes them both trying to get to the other one. But the whole bit with Jornik also trying to like run away from it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's just confusing because the way that the story is played, Jornik has apparently gotten the best of Lila and robbed her Dyson sphere, which is why the Urg is out there, because that is another one of Lila's possessions, is the egg that the Urg was born out of.
Right.
So, all right, setting all of that aside, right? And then, we've got the magical music box, which needs to be delivered to another group of aliens, which is coming through and threatening to blow up all of Madripoor. We also have Guido on the scene, who is helping Lila with this. And I'm just curious, like, the way that Guido and Lila kind of their relationship seems to have shifted over time. You know, there's almost
Mhm.
kind of a romantic overtone to
Mhm.
like the two of them seeing each other, which I don't remember from the Claremont times.
I definitely think of them as friends with benefits, we'll say.
Ah, okay.
But what I'm not sure about is if that came from Claremont or if that came later
Hmm.
and then kind of can retroactively be read in the Claremont stuff. Because I mean, it's not like it would be the first time that Claremont snuck some for the time non-typical sexual relationships into a book without drawing a huge amount of attention to it, so he could get away with it. But at the same time, I don't know. He wrote maybe two scenes between Lila and Guido through the
Hmm.
years. I mean, he is Guido's creator, but it isn't like he ever really did a whole lot with him. Most of the work, what we know of as the character, pretty much came from Peter David.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so that's like, is that where the Lila Guido stuff came from? But I've always kind of gotten the vibe from them that like he's her bodyguard and they're not like romantically involved, but they knock boots every once in a while.
I love this scenario. It's great. Because he does seem to have a vested interest in, the former original relationship was he was her bodyguard,
Right,
but this
right.
is much more like, hey, we're great friends and, I need to protect you no matter what. This results in, I mean, the big X Factor cliffhanger, right? And we're not that far removed from the death of Jamie Madrox, right?
Nope, that was
Um,
in issue 100, so that's
the year,
11 issues before that. Yeah, roughly a year before this.
yeah, and 111 is the cover is kind of explicitly shows that maybe Guido isn't going to live. We see him looks like he's dead on the cover.
Right.
Lila is kind of mourning him, and at the end of this second issue, the third group of aliens that we see here have unleashed these magic sim crystals across Madripoor. I believe is it Lorna who merges them all together?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And, Guido is like, I'm going to jump on the grenade, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's too much because Guido's powers will allow him to, grow and expand, but his heart can't take it. And it does appear at the end of this that he is dead. He's
Right.
flatlined. He is gone. Does that work for you as like a, hey, we're moving to Age of Apocalypse, but you maybe should still be worried about your dead friend kind of scenario here?
At the time, and I read these in real time as they were published. I mean, Age of Apocalypse was like mind blowing
Oh yeah.
when it was coming out, live as you were experiencing it. And so at the time, that as the Age of Apocalypse cliffhangers go, every book kind of had their own version of this. This one worked for me. It was like, oh no, what's going to happen with Strong Guy? Going back to it and reading it with the benefit of hindsight, it becomes more frustrating than anything because this is pretty much the end of both Guido in this version of X Factor and really this version of X Factor.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, they come back from Age of Apocalypse, and X Factor gets a pretty big overhaul,
Yeah.
even relative to some of the other changes that come out of Age of Apocalypse, and the tone really changes pretty significantly. And Guido is, we don't really see him on panel again for a number of issues. They sort of hand wave that like, oh, he's alive and he's in a coma recovering from his heart attack, and he pops up a couple of times down the road and whatever, but we really don't get much from this character again until Peter David comes back and does the Madrox private investigator stuff and kind of kickstarts X Factor again. But you don't know any of that here. Like here, it's just a you know cliffhanger, and so at the time you're like, oh no, is he going to be okay? And now I'm like, well, that's a crappy way to write out this character and end this iteration of what was a fairly unique and successful version of the book.
Yeah, no, I agree. We'll talk a little bit when we get to our next story about what happens in between.
Hmm.
But it is interesting to me though that I mean character deaths were kind of a staple of 90s comics. And
Right.
it did seem, that X Factor was like, I don't know if it was because they were struggling with sales or what, but the fact that they had to kill off 2 of their main cast members within a year is just, I don't know. It's just interesting. And the fact that it happens here in a story that is mainly played for laughs, this has a lot in common with like John Francis Moore's X-Men 2099 in terms of goofiness.
Right.
It's odd, right?
Well, and then it is odd, and at the same time, in this issue, they're already teasing the return of Madrox.
Right, because Val Cooper sees him walking around.
Right. And so on the one hand, you're not wrong. This book felt like it was very much trying to be like look at us, we're killing off characters, come buy copies. This will be a collector's item someday, kids. But then they're kind of undercutting any narrative heft that those deaths are going to have when in the same issue that they're asking us to get worried about the fate of Guido, they're already teasing the return of the last guy they killed off for stunt value less than a year ago. It hasn't even been that long. And I mean, he's called the Multiple Man. No one then certainly took it all that seriously that he was really going to be gone forever. But it's just kind of funny that you're trying to do both at the same time in the exact same issue. Like, take this seriously, but don't worry, they'll be back.
Oh, it's so funny to me that, these covers have that whole X-Men Deluxe label on them, and I know better paper quality, we were dealing with advances in color separation, but it always makes me laugh when a 22-page comic is X-Men Deluxe,
Don't you want to get me ranting about X-Men, about the Deluxe. I know, like you said, I know it's for better. It gave us better coloring eventually. Some of it was still pretty garish when they were figuring that out.
Well, yeah.
But comics have, this is my kids get off my lawn moment. Comics have not been the same since they switched to like glossy magazine-esque paper. Like there was something specifically comic booky about the kind of newsprint that comics were printed on, and once they basically just became like little magazines, it just was never the same after that.
Yeah, there is something glorious about that. Not glorious is probably these 2 issues. I think we would probably agree that this is not nearly as good as the first story that we ranked. So why don't we take a look at our list? We do have a few other X Factor stories here, but I'm looking much lower. I think we're probably in the 600s here,
Yeah.
Because there's nothing terrible about this, but it's just kind of...
No, I mean, the biggest problem it has is that I'm not sure why it's an X Factor story other than the Lila connection, because they're fighting aliens in Madripoor. What does that have to do with being the government's mutant response team and or a funny character driven and or psychologically driven book? Like, it's so generic.
Well, funny enough, we do have another very random, and I don't want to call this racist, but like mildly culturally insensitive Madripoor story. At 600, we have Generation X 53 to 54, Big Trouble in Madripoor. I feel like these 2 stories are very much in the same realm of just...
Yes.
What is going on with these stories?
And I mean, frankly, Ghost Box, Astonishing X-Men 2530 is right there too, and it's kind of in that same what did that have to do with anything? And, that seems like a pretty good spot.
So we have the Muir Island saga at 613, which I think, at least in terms of, not in terms of its like finished product, but in terms of the story it's telling, it's probably a little bit more important than this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think Judgment War down at 620 is probably better than this.
You're talking to the guy who'd have Judgment War in like his top 100 if he had his brothers. So I'm not going to argue that Judgment War is better than this. I definitely agree with that.
Oh man, I know that one gets us a lot of heat sometimes.
I am very glad that I got to express my love for Judgment War on an episode when Zach wasn't here.
All right, now how about, let's see. I just keep working my way down.
Right.
I what do you think about this versus at 636 we have the X Factor 259, the issue where we establish that Shatterstar and Longshot are each other's
Oh
like
God.
fathers, grandfathers, whatever. The Daddy Boros issue. Is this better than that?
Kind of like the Muir Island saga. I don't think that story is necessarily better, but that story is more memorable
Okay.
and cuckoo bananas
It sure is.
than this one. So that's worth something.
All right. So I'm going to say my bottom here is at 649, X Factor She-Hulk Secret Invasion. I do think this story is better than that.
Yeah. And I like it more than Exogenesis, which is right above that as well.
Okay.
I like it better than Uncanny X-Men Annual 8.
You know, I'm of a mind with 644, which is the return to Asgard in New Mutants, that at least that has Brett Blevins art.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would put this at 645. What do you think about that?
I like that. That works for me.
All right,
I think that's fair.
That's a reasonable place here. Plug that in at 645. We have X Factor Volume 1, 110 to 111. All right, so our third story tonight. Austin, you mentioned that this character kind of of Guido just kind of disappears off the map for a while. I do think that this next story we're going to talk about is kind of a litmus test to see how interested readers might be in really re-engaging with this character. Because as you mentioned, after Age of Apocalypse, Forge just kind of like magically fixes Guido's heart. And then Guido and Jamie, who's back and is alive, just decide, yeah, we don't want to be an X Factor anymore. We're hitting the road. So that leads to a new era of X Factor, which has mystique. It's a little bit darker, right? It's, centered
Wild
around...
Child is there.
Yeah.
From Alpha Flight.
They're going for much more of an X-Force vibe, right?
Bishop's sentient holographic sister is involved. Shard, yeah.
It's a wild thing.
Yeah, it's something, all right.
So our third story tonight is a one-shot that did not have any subsequent issues. It is called Strong Guy Reborn, for I guess the folks in the back who didn't realize that he wasn't dead.
Right.
This is written by, we were just talking about him, Todd DeZago, penciled by Andy Smith, inked by, unfortunately, current comic skater Art the Bear, and colored by Matt Webb. This is a really interesting attempt at trying to kind of make Strong Guy into a fourth wall breaking Deadpool She-Hulk type.
Yeah. You posited that this was an attempt to see what kind of interest there was in this character. I was also wondering if this was just an attempt to maintain some kind of copyright on the name Strong Guy. Marvel was notorious for that kind of thing. We got lots of Captain Marvel one-shots starring Monica Rambeau once Roger Stern stopped writing her and no one else cared, just to keep that name in Marvel's control. I wonder if that's what was going on here. I also wonder if this was just this is 97. This is post bankruptcy. This is Marvel just trying to wring every last possible dollar they can out of the cash cows that are X-Men and Spider-Man at this point.
Would not surprise me. Now, the tone of this, even from the cover, is very, very silly.
Yes.
It is. The cover features Guido in a child's stroller with a pacifier hanging out of his mouth, surrounded by toys, saying, "Okay, people, now this is ridiculous." The cover says, "An intergalactic summer fun spectacular," guest starring Lila Cheney. Before we get into the absolutely bizarre storyline that's here, we should probably just make note. What are your thoughts on Andy Smith's artwork here?
Well, this is post Joe Mad. This is the everyone is trying to do Joe Mad, and they're trying and the manga stuff um, was like actual manga
Mm-hmm.
um, was breaking into the U.S. market at this point, and so you just had a ton of people that were trying to do that kind of style, and this just seems like this Andy Smith here is doing like a washed up or like a watered down Jeff Matsuda, who was the regular
Yes.
penciler on X Factor around that time that you were talking about, but Matsuda was just doing a watered down version of Joe Mad when he started anyway. So now we're like two steps removed from the source at this point. I mean, it's not tonally dissonant. It fits the kind of goofier, tongue in cheek, fourth wall breaking kind of story, but it's not good. I don't like it.
Yeah, it's funny because it does match the tone, which is definitely supposed to be very silly and humorous. But at the same time, Andy is drawing everybody with these impossibly skinny, where are your internal organs waists,
Mm-hmm.
including
Mm-hmm.
Strong Guy. Lila
Right.
Cheney, just her torso is a triangle. It is
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
pinched at the waist, so it's just absolutely insane.
And her breasts are enormous, as
Oh
as was the
yes.
style at the time. I mean, you compare this Lila to the Jackson Geist Kyle Baker Lila from New Mutants 42, and it's just like one looks like an approximation of a human being, and the other one is whatever this is.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. We start with the characters on a beach vacation. They're relaxing, they're hanging out. Strong bad.
Yeah.
Jesus. Sorry. Strong guy is doing a little bit of recapping
Yep.
by using these like impeccably sculpted sand sculptures of all of his friends. I'm like, who made these? And surely not Guido with his giant fingers. Like, there's no
Right.
way.
Right.
And Lila, portal opens up in the sky, and Lila gets kidnapped. This is interesting.
The other thing I love about the sand recap
Yeah.
is this was a period in Marvel where they finally came to terms with the fact that like continuity is twisted and complicated,
Oh yeah.
and they would start off they changed how they did it, but they'd have like inside the front cover or on the first page, it's common nowadays, but they'd have the like summary of like what's come before and who are the characters in this book. And we see that kind of thing in every book nowadays, but they really like resisted doing that for a long
Oh
time.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So you get the recap that Strong Guy then recaps via sand figures like 2 pages later. And so it's like the writers hadn't quite figured out yet that they no longer had to work the exposition into the story. And so you get it like twice.
I noticed the same exact thing, and it's very funny that they felt the need to do that after a lot of heavy exposition text on the first 2 pages. Lila and Strong Guy are sucked into a very goofy, almost Seussian intergalactic conflict between the Jorkins,
Which look like
not
frogs.
yes, please not to be confused with Jornick from our last story. Because I'm reading this and I was like, wait, are these the same guys?
No.
No, they're not. They are little, like you said, frog guys who kind of talk like Jar Jar Binks, but this is before Jar Jar Binks, so it's
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
quite there. And the Kronts, and they are fighting over a moon, which is nothing but a rock in space, but they've just decided for generations to fight over this. And the Jorkins have figured out that if they get Lila Cheney, that maybe Lila Cheney could teleport some bombs over to the Krantz and destroy them. Lila is like, you can't kidnap me. I can teleport. So they then kidnap Strong Guy, who is in the midst of trying to get ready for Lila's next and final show of her tour, her latest sort of intergalactic tour. We also get introduced to Kreator, another gigantic, Strong Guy sized alien type character. And what did you think of the Jamaican themed alien Rebo? That was
I tried.
awkward.
I tried not to.
Mm,
There's a lot of I spent a lot of time reading this issue trying to figure out if these names were meant to like be riffs on something, like creator. Is that like creator,
creature.
creature? I couldn't settle on anything, but I spent a lot of time in my head trying to make it work, and I think that was all wasted time that I'll never get back. But yeah, if you thought Jar Jar Binks was bad, here is Rebo, a tiny Jamaican blue alien man.
Oof. Yeah, that really was like, oh boy, this is another time in our histories of
Yeah,
people. So we're getting all of these, sort of comic foibles. One of the things, and I mentioned this before, that makes this issue stand out a little bit more. Strong Guy breaks the fourth wall, which he has
yeah,
never done before, and I have to say,
no.
really kind of took me aback. And I was like, I don't think I can get on board with this.
This was the time. This is circa early Joe Kelly Deadpool,
Yep.
but the important thing to remember, kids may not believe it today, but that Joe Kelly Deadpool run was kind of on life support for most of its existence.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a critical and cult favorite that managed to stave off cancellation, I think largely because Marvel was like, well, we got to publish something. Um,
Right.
and whereas nowadays, I mean, Deadpool is he's everywhere. He's the only MCU movie we're getting this year is starring Deadpool, but at the time it was kind of so. All which is to say, like, maybe they're trying to emulate some of the success of the Joe Kelly Deadpool, but then at the time, I don't think there was much success there that they would
Mm,
feel like they wanted to emulate it. Your She-Hulk comp is a good one, but it wasn't like anyone was really doing anything with She-Hulk at this time. I don't
no,
think.
no.
It's very strange because Guido was always, at least under Peter David, was a funny character. He was a comic relief character. He cracked jokes, all that kind of stuff, but he never was fourth wall breaking like this, which is just weird.
Yeah, and he's doing it, I think, at least 3 times in the issue, which is it
Yeah.
just takes you out of an already very silly story. They defeat they at one point they are, I did like this joke. They are imprisoned by the Kront leader, and he is threatening to dip them in acid, but he's also obsessed with watches. He has stolen Lila Cheney's watch, and all they have to do to defeat him is Strong Bad. I did it again. Strong Guy, Strong Guy asks him what time it is, to which he tips the boiling acid onto himself. I just That's the kind of like dorky humor that this is relying on throughout the book. I have a certain soft spot for that kind of silliness. So I didn't
Yeah. Well,
hate
and I did
this.
love just the punchline of like, so he basically like melts down and goes down the drain, and Strong Guy's like, well, that was messy. Let's get out of here.
Yeah, yeah. So Strong Guy's solution to this, he's figured out, is a simple one. Let's have them, instead of them all blowing us up, let's have them blow the moon up so they have nothing to fight over anymore. And of course, the issue ends with what I guess was supposed to be maybe a lead into potential future issues of whatever Strong Guy was going to do next. Both civilizations decide, instead of spending their entire generational existences trying to blow up the moon, they're going to try and kill Lila and Guido, which I think is kind of a funny ending to this story, but
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily make me want to read more adventures of this style and with these characters.
Well, that's good, Adam, because you can't. I don't think there's any more stories
No.
that do anything with any of this. So, dodged a bullet there.
Yeah, yeah. I am also a sucker for activity pages, and I did appreciate that there are several on the back of this, including some like a page of paper dolls with Strong
hmm
Guy,
hmm
connect the
A
dots.
maze. You've got a
Yeah,
little maze that you can do. Yeah, some quick dots. That's fun. I also enjoyed the There's a house ad for all of the new number ones that were
Oh
coming.
yeah, yeah.
Because this is I think still when Heroes Reborn is happening. So you've
Mhm.
got Avengers and FF and Cap and Iron Man are off being handled by Jim Lee and the Rob and their surrogates. So that Marvel's got these holes in their schedule to fill. So you get Deadpool, the Joe Kelly Deadpool, and you get Thunderbolts, which is probably the big winner out of this group. A
Yeah,
new Marvel team up, a new Alpha Flight, all
there's
that kind
some
of stuff.
duds here,
Yeah, Maverick. Hey, everyone loved
Maverick.
Maverick, right? He got a solo series.
Crazy.
Young Jim Chung art on that one.
That is true. That is true. At
Which
least it
is
looked good, right?
yes, yeah.
So I'm a little mixed on this one. Like
Me too.
it is bad, but I also didn't have a terrible time with it because it's just silly, and
Right.
I have a soft spot for that kind of thing.
And
So
it's very. I'm less soft on silly, but I'm more forgiving of it here than some of the sillier beats in the earlier X Factor Lila Guido story, because this is a one shot. This is a strong guy one shot. This isn't them trying to shoehorn an alien intergalactic adventure into the book about the government's mutant heroes. So I can swallow this down a little bit easier than I could there. Though of course that had a minor bit of narrative importance in the way it writes out Strong Guy, whereas this is just kind of a desert of narrative impact. But it's fun.
so better or worse than what we were just talking about with X Factor 110 to 111? What do you think?
I would say I'll say this. I might be more inclined to go back and look at this again than I would those two X Factor issues.
I think I would too. It's just there's something very silly and kind of fun about it.
I mean, I just like randomly flipped to a page as we were finishing up our discussion, and like there's a giant hair dryer, like a blow
Yeah.
dryer with a
Right.
plug, and I mean, like it's just it's nonsense, but it's something. That other X Factor story was just so generic and bland, other than the very ending of it, and that was just like a panel. So who cares?
Yeah, yeah. I would say at the very least, down at 639, we have all new X-Men 4 to 7. That's Mark Bagley.
Hmm.
And that's the
Hmm.
arc where they're in Paris with Toad. I enjoyed this more than that.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't think this is taking as many risks as above that at 638 is the second half of Ultimate Comics X-Men 13 to 18, Divided We Fall, United We Stand, which is a
Hmm.
uniquely strange X-Men story that I just don't think this has that narrative, risk taking involved. So
Right,
what
right.
do you think about plugging this in at 639?
I think that works.
All right, so at 639, we have Strong Guy Reborn #1. Austin, that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Of course, it was indeed lots of fun. I had a blast.
If people want to engage with your work, find you online, where should they go?
You can follow me on most of the major social media sites now. Some variation on Austin Gorton. It's at Austin Gorton on Twitter or Zitter or X or whatever the hell we're calling it now. Um, that at Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. I send out links to most of my writing there. I've been celebrating the 50th anniversary of Wolverine by blasting out a Wolverine cover, or a cover featuring Wolverine, every day. I've also got my ongoing trading card a day series there, so come
Oh,
check
I
out
love that one.
various comic book trading cards from that. And then you can read my writing at therealgentlemanofleisure.com and Comics XF and random other places.
Awesome. And Austin, just because I have you here, thank you so much. I love working with you on Comics XF. So you've edited many things that I've put together, or the things that Anna and I have written together. So thank you for that. It's always great
Uh,
to work with you.
I appreciate that. It's great working with you. I like we've teamed up on quite a few things now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a great crew, and I love working with you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. Folks who want to follow me on socials can go to Twitter and Instagram. Well, let's see. Twitter, Arthur Stacy, Adam Reck at Blue Sky and Instagram. Next week, we are talking about a story that I've been looking forward to talking about for quite some time. The character in question is Eva Bell. So we're going to be talking about some Tempest stories next week. We do hope you will tune in. This has been Battle of the Atom, and we hope you survive the experience.
Get